Greetings and welcome. I'm Clive Branson. For those who have been following me on YouTube, welcome. For those who haven't, welcome too. The reason I'm on this particular vlog, this is going to be an autobiography, if you like, of my book, which is available on Amazon. It's in hardback or it's in ebook. This is the first time, as far as I know, somebody's putting their autobiography on a YouTube platform. Obviously, for years to come, people will be able to view it, and save them buying a book, they can view it online instead. Now, during my angling career, which has now spanned over 50 years, I have witnessed many developments and innovations. I was billed as the world's first professional angler way back by one of the angling papers. I introduced an involuntary approach to teaching videos, and I imported a lot of new concepts from abroad back into the country, such things as high-tech fishing line, new ground baits. I also introduced floats on winders, wagglers and sticks, and I also introduced a lot of new pole float designs. Just to mention a few. Now, not many people actually know this, but I like to pride myself the fact that I was one of the first to do this. Anyway, throughout my career, innovations has been the key. I was an early pioneer in developing online information to anglers. My angling website, www.anglingnews.co.uk, was the first in the UK after the .com explosion. Now, these days, online development has grown exponentially, including social media and interactive sites, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and so on. So there, I'm, if you like, using the latest technology to present my autobiography. Okay, now, when I first wrote my autobiography, which was a year or two ago, I dug into a lot of my memoirs and recollection events of the last 50 years, which has been a journey of sentiment and also emotion, but while revitalizing, hopefully interesting you as you listen. So follow me as I delve into my match fishing career that took me from a daydreaming schoolboy into a world champion. With all the lows and highs of my angling career, all I will expound before you, and you'll have insights into the way fishing used to be and how it is to this day. When I first wrote my autobiography, which was 2017, it's now 2019, a few things have changed. I'm now sort of semi-retired, and I'm living in Thailand, and I'm making this video from Thailand. I recently just got married to a beautiful Thai lady, Nopret, and we've just had a baby as well. Now, anyone work out the ages, well, you'll know I'm sort of bored again. Anyway, the main thing is the fishing is good over here as well, so I try, if I can, spend the winters over here and the summers back in UK. So I'm still fishing and still going strong. So anyway, let's carry on. Okay, well, I was born in Cardiff, in the country of Wales, within the United Kingdom, for the people who are viewing this outside the UK. I was born in January 1951. My parents, Sydney and Barbara, my mum, they met just during the war, the Second World War, and my mother was in the Land Army and my dad was a Navy officer, and anyway, they both met, and just after the war they stuck together, and they had visions of building a family, and I was the firstborn, and I was there was 5 of us altogether. There was 4 brothers and a sister. Anyway, my fishing all started during my childhood when I grew a fascination for water, which almost cost me my young life. Being pushed from behind by a so-called friend into the river, thinking it was a bit of fun, not realizing that at that stage I couldn't swim. And because of that, I suppose subconscious fear of water. I've never been able to swim. I've just anyway. I've fallen in a few times in the river, but I've always managed to get out, and I think I can do a little bit of a doggy paddle anyway. But anyway, when I did fall in the river, I can recollect as it was yesterday. I was almost blacking out, and I was actually rescued by some other friends. But it never really kept me away from water, because I loved the rivers and lakes and you know. Yeah, so anyway, after that event, I carried on fishing, and my brothers, they were all interested in fishing as well, but they never had the passion that I had. I had the passion, which has it really cost me a lot, but it's also been very rewarding over the years. For example, when I was a youngster, I was pretty good at sports. I did develop a childhood asthma, and because of that, I couldn't do any long sort of sports, running and that sort of thing. But I do short sports like jumping, high jumping, and so on. And I become pretty good at them. I won a couple of awards when I was just a youngster, and I suppose that was the foundation of me being having a winning mentality later on in life, especially when it came to fishing. I did also become quite good at football. I was a goalkeeper again. Didn't have to chase the ball. I was in goal, and people would try and get the ball past me, and I managed to do pretty good. In fact, I was doing quite well, and it was write-ups in the local paper about my heroics, and my dad used to cut out the little clippings and put them into the little scrapbook. I don't know whatever happened to them, but I can recall. But what I can tell you as well is that I actually I was called up for a trial for Cardiff City football at a young age. However, it clashed on a weekend, on a Saturday, with a fishing competition, and you guess what? Fishing won. I went fishing. I did. I've obviously wondered after, if I had obviously kept the goalkeeping sport up, whether I could have become a professional. But of course, the money wasn't in the game in them days that there is today. Now, my fishing passion started when I was about 12 years old. I saw some other young lads catching eels, not that big, on hand lines under the weir on the local river, the River Taff, a place called Black Weir. The river was close to my hometown, which is in the centre of Cardiff, and anyway, catching those eels on worms and keeping them alive in small pools by the river was great fun as a youngster. And I remember in those days the magic of the river. Thousands of little elvers, black, climbing up the weir, to go upstream. And also sea trout, suin as the Welsh call them, which is Welsh for the sea trout. I could see them jumping the weir as well. Things you won't see today, unfortunately, especially the elvers. Anyway, during the summer holidays, I was quite content most of the time to actually be over the river fishing. A little bit like Tom Sawyer, I always had a rod over my back and looking for a place to fish. And that's where I got my fascination from fishing as a 12-year-old. Even though my family, my brothers, never really, as I said, took it on as a passion, but I persevered and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, so as a young inquisitive person, even in those early days, I always looked at ways of improving my fishing. From the hand lines, I developed a fishing rod or pole and a whip out of bean poles borrowed from my parents' back garden. Using them as like short whips, and also put them together, making like small poles. Uh, It wasn't long afterwards that I actually discovered old tank aerials. In fact, all the lads at the time, that's what we started using. They were cheap. You get them from the second-hand shops, and anyway, you could convert them into a reasonably good fishing rod, taping, obviously eyes on them, and so on. And all the lads I befriended, that's what we used to use. And that's where I learned the basics of, I suppose, trotting the river. They were a bit heavy, but we learned to cope with it. Anyway, that's where I suppose I learned to catch roach, minnows, of all things, gudgeon. Anyway, now it's a funny thing. It's always remarkable how we remember our first fish. Most people do, and mine was a single roach. About 4 ounces. I'm so excited about catching it. I remember taking it home, showing my parents, and actually cooked it and tried to eat it. Full of bones, disgusting, really. But I suppose when you're young, you don't know any better, and you got to try these things. And of course, not really realizing that coarse fish have to be returned. But there we are. That was all good fun. That was in my very early ages. Yeah, so through my teenage years, whenever I got the chance, I would always be over the river, and trying to catch fish. The river tap, it was black with coal dust, which was washed away from the coal mines further up the river, up in the Rhondda Valley. And because they were mining villages in them days, basically when it rained especially, the water would wash through the mines and into the river, and the river was black. It was so black, but the funny thing was we could still catch roach, and in fact it was a tremendous roach river, with huge weights of roach being caught. This day, of course, I believe the river's a lot cleaner now, and you haven't got it's not quite ideal conditions, but we still catch fish there, which I'll be going into a little bit later. Yeah, so as I was saying, like during my schooling years, teenage years, fishing over the river Taff, and it was, as I said, full of roach, dace. You get the odd chub there as well. Now, my favourite method of catching roach in them days was on that little fluted float, which I'll show you diagrams of a fluted float later on. But basically, we're using silkweed as bait. What I liked about that, it was free, and the fish just love it. Long strands, we'd wrap it around the hook, and I think there was like maybe little creatures living in the silkweed or something, but the fish used to love it. I always catch loads and loads of them, Anyway, when I was young, I always thought maybe where is fishing going to take me, and I often dreamt. I used to read in the papers, the Angling Times at the time, about competitions, and I thought, I wonder, maybe I could enter competition. So I started looking around, and that's when I first started. The beginning of my match fishing was around about 14 or 15 years of age. Yes, often when I was in school classes, I'd often daydream about fishing, and also become a bit of an obsession because whenever we had essays, I'd write about fishing, or when we had woodwork, I'd make something to do with fishing, and I remember making a paper mache of a fisherman with a rod. But at them days, who knows what would happen later on. But anyway, during the schooling years, I was fortunate to make a bond with one of the teachers. He also enjoyed fishing, and Mr. Williams, his name was, or Spike was his nickname. He taught science, and he did have the foresight to introduce into the school curriculum a fishing class, and taking those who really were interested fishing, and he would take them either over the river or down to the sea. my most memorable time, I suppose, was when he took us sea fishing down at a place called St Athens, and he developed a floating candle float. And what he would do, he'd get a candle and he'd warm it up and pull the wick out, so he'd have the hole going through the candle, and obviously he'd run the line through it, so it'd become a little bit of a slider as well, and he would cast out and he would let the current of the sea, sort of take it out, and he'd catch bass up in the water. So even in them days, there was a little bit of innovation going on then. As I said, it was after that, when I left school, I lost contact with Spike, and but I suppose in a way he was a good teacher, because, as I said, he did learn that you had to bring other things into science as well as the classroom teachings. He actually brought science out to nature, which was great, because he would mix it up a little bit. Anyway, as I said, at the age of 14, I did start to fish these small club matches, which were held on the lower River Taff. Glamorgan anglers in them days, and I think they're still going strong even to this day. They were very much match orientated in them days, and they would run small matches. And anyway, on this one occasion, my first time I entered, I actually won the competition. I beat all the senior anglers. Yeah, I drew a peg, what we call the Sandies, right behind now the sports centre, and I remember the river actually, it was like a bit of an eddy, and it was like going backwards. So I was actually trotting a float, going upstream instead of downstream. And anyway, I won the match using, I used silkweed. I won at £20, 8 ounces, and the great thing was I actually beat the club secretary who was running the match into second place. But great. Arthur Seeger his name was, yeah. Probably long gone by now, but as I said, beating senior opposition even in them days was great fun. And yeah, I, reflecting back now, I was thinking, during my teenage years, using pound, shillings and pence in them days, and I had a diary of my match winnings, and I remember writing down winning £1 3p or 3d in them days. In the diary, it gave me all the information as well as the swim I drew, and the conditions on the day, the depth, the flow, colour of the water, etc., temperature, and the methods I used. And it was a diary, and I could actually look back on it in years to come, and I suppose could help me if ever I drew that swim again. It's a great practice, and unfortunately as I grew older, I stopped keeping the diary, and I did lose track of my results. So my best advice to any youngster out there, or anyone at any age really, is keep a diary, because it's surprising, by going back on it, what you forget. Yes, I remember as a youngster, one of my heroes at the time was Ivan Max. He's a match angler, and I remember him saying, a match angler should have a memory like a diary, and be able to flick back the pages and remember situations that's happened before, and obviously will help him, in the fishing. Anyway, so I did write everything down, and I did review my diary on a quite constantly, and I'm sure it helped me, becoming a better match angler. I suppose the highlight of my young career was winning the junior national at the age of 14 as well, on the River Taff, by Blackware, trotting a fluted float, as I mentioned already, under an overhanging tree, and using my special bait, the silkweed. It was a low weight, £4, 4 ounces of roach, but it was enough to win the junior section of the match, and I remember the little trophy I had. I kept it by my bedside for a long time, polishing it every day almost. uh, anyway, in fact, I still got it, I'm sure, somewhere. I did win a lot of trophies in them days, and of course these days you don't get the trophies like you used to have then. Anyway, um, the River Taff, as I say, it was an exceptional river, and in those early days it would also attract a lot of anglers from other parts of the country, including some West Midland anglers. They would come down and dominate some of the matches using wasp grub and a new bait called casters. Um, and they used to catch chub that we never used to catch. So that was, that was quite a big learning curve. It was in those early days as well that casters as a bait, which is the pupa of the maggot, and catching them, just before they float, so they're always in a sinking state. And I believe it was Benny Ashurst or Billy Lane, bait dealers from the northwest, the Midlands, who first developed this great bait, and in addition, another thing that these Midland anglers brought with them was a waggler. Now, to us, we never really fished wagglers. I mean, we fished a sort of a waggler, like a little balsa body, what we call a trotter. We used to use them, but they brought streamline wagglers, peacock quills and that sort of thing. It was attached to the bottom, and you could actually fish the far side of the river without any tangles. And when you retrieved it, it'd come through the water, quite easily. And you could hook a fish, and bring it in slowly, and the angler wouldn't know you're bringing the fish in. So, as I say, it was a great innovation in them days, the waggler. Of course, now these days, wagglers, one of the best methods to use, I think, on a lot of rivers anyway. I remember though, I probably knew the importance of casters long before they become fashionable and popular. There was an old angler I befriended as a youngster. His name was Old Pete. He passed away a few years ago, but I remember Pete. Every time I was over the river, he would always be over there, and it was through Peter that I learned, the first rudiments of fishing. And I remember him using a combination of maggots and casters on the hook, and quite often he would catch some really good quality roach using casters. So I suppose it's something that I can remember him using different coloured casters. He wouldn't make them uniform like you would today. But I know that one thing I did learn is to get the casters the same colour, because we used to turn our own in them days, of course. These days you can go to the shop and buy them, but what we used to do, we used to turn them, and because they were all different colours, we get lay out a cloth, damp cloth, lay the casters over it, wrap them up, roll them up, put them in the fridge, and leave them there for an hour or two. Open them up, and like magic, they're all the same colour again. All the same colour, lovely, brilliant, sort of a golden brown colour. Obviously, you float them off to make sure the floaters would go away, or keep them for hook baits. But that was something I learned very, very early on. And as I say, it's a great way of returning casters and keeping them in plastic bags. I'm not a great believer in putting casters in plastic bags, because they actually they do die, so I do try to keep them open if I can and give them a bit of air. Yeah, in reflection, I'm thinking back, some of those England anglers, well-known anglers, Alan Tromans from the Midlands, Austin Clissett from Birmingham, Kevin Ashurst from Lee. He'd come down, and I remember him winning a competition with £18 at Castor Roach, Castor Court Roach. Shortly after him winning another match, actually, on the River Trent. I think my records tell me it was £41. He caught on the Trent and he came down the tap and he won it, as I said, with £18. And the funny thing is that match with Kevin, Ivan marks a second, and he also had £39, and he was caught him on casters as well. That was in 1965. Yeah, it was a Nottingham AA competition. Of course, them days you used to get hundreds of anglers turning up. You know, I believe the reason for these famous anglers come into the local river because it was fantastic fishing. My fondest recollection is £44 in a 5-hour competition called by a local angler, Tony James. He caught them by what we call the flower bed gardens. Yeah, good old days then. But meeting Kevin Ashurst in person was a true highlight then in my younger years. I was mesmerised as he talked in a strange dialect, chatting about a roach disease spreading throughout the country at the time called columnaris. Anyway, Kevin and I became good friends when I grew older, but more about him later on in the autobiography.